Danny boy, the pipes are calling. Good. I will not torture you more with my singing. Hello and welcome to Whisky.com, where fine spirits meet. And this song here is, a legendary song. Most of the people know it. It's an old Irish song. And there is a legend behind that song, because that song was sung during the time where Daniel E. Williams had a lot of shops in Dublin that sold whiskey, and the legend is that he had pipes under the city that were pumping whiskey into his stores, and during these pumping actions the people were singing, "Oh Danny boy, the pipes are calling." Today we're gonna have a look at what this Daniel E. Williams had to do with the Tullamore, and we're gonna have a look at the new Tullamore Distillery. It's just outside of Tullamore, or not more inside Tullamore anymore, so it's outside the city, but it is the inheritage of the old Tullamore Distillery. But let's get into this history and what the Tullamore Distillery used to be back in the days in just a second. The history of the Tullamore Distillery starts with a man named Michael Molloy in 1829, and he actually set up the distillery in the town of Tullamore, not very far from here, just a 10-minute drive. And he just set up an Irish distillery and just had a normal distillery business going on. In 1862, a young man named Daniel Edmund Williams starts his apprenticeship at the distillery at the tender age of 14. So he was really a young person just to learn the business. And when he was a little bit older, 25, in the year 1873, he actually worked his way up. He became a general manager, and actually he then was partnered into the distillery, into the company, and later he even became the owner of the distillery. So he was then really in charge and in ownership of the distillery of Tullamore. And he, as the name suggests, he is Daniel Edmund Williams, and his initials are D.E.W, so do. And he lent his name in 1893 to the brand, and he actually made the brand Tullamore D.E.W, and he actually created the slogan, "Give every man his due." And due is a word for your salary, or for what you deserve to get. So he then made a play on words that every man should get the due, or his due, and the due was the whiskey. The date 1920 is always, or the 1920s were always associated really bad for Irish whiskey. First of all, in 1918, the whole market of the United States, well, nearly the whole market, broke off because of the Prohibition. And in the 1920s then, the Ireland wanted to become an own republic, and that means they actually got into a struggle with the United Kingdom, and the whole Commonwealth stood behind the United Kingdom. So the exports to Canada, Australia, India, and all of the rest of the Commonwealth nations, that went down considerably as well. And so it was really bad for the industry. They actually held it out pretty well until 1954, when they actually ceased production with the Tullamore whiskey, and they still had a good amount of stocks, so they launched the Tullamore D.E.W first blended whiskey, which was even at that time more common to have a blended whiskey. So the family ties were a bit different, and they actually married into a bit of the John Lane Distillery, which is the Powers Distillery, or which distillery that produces Powers. And in the 1960s, they actually produced Tullamore D.E.W under the license in the John Lane Distillery. And that changed, and they got the stuff from elsewhere. There's a lot of licensed distillers in Ireland. It's not that great of a single malt market, but in 2010, then the William Grant and Sons actually bought Tullamore D.E.W as a brand, and they said, okay, we want to bring back Tullamore as a distillery. So they got into the books and they read about all the history and went to the town of Tullamore, and they got a plan out, and there were permits and everything. It works for the distillery here on that side, which is outside of Tullamore, about 10 minutes. Began in 2013, and in 2014, after 60 years of silence of distilling Tullamore at the Tullamore Distillery, they reopened the distillery and they produced whiskey again. They started off with the single malt and the single pot still. They didn't have any grain distillery yet. The grain distillery was built in 2017. And now the facility has 3 spirits that we're gonna come back later that are produced here. 2020, they even extended. They got a working cooperage here, so they can buy any cask on the world, even if it's in bad shape, and just rejuvenate it here on site. And today, it's saved and sipped and savored around in 80 countries around the world. And now let's find out how the whiskey is being produced. One of the most important parts in whiskey are the ingredients. The water for the Tullamore is sourced from the local mountains here. It's from a local water source in the Sleeve Blue Mountains, and they get supplied with fresh water. They actually do filter that water still a bit to get out the heavy minerals, to get the taste right for the whiskey. The next ingredient is then the barley. And here at Tullamore, we have for the barley, we have 2 kinds of spirits we do. We do a single pot still whiskey and a single malt. The single malt is obviously 100% malted barley. That is then grinded down in a roller mill. It's actually a pretty modern roller mill that is actually in a wet process. So that is very good because it's in a safe environment, and you're already soaking in the barley already a bit. That is pretty good for the next stages. The single pot still whiskey is then 50% unmalted barley and 50% malted barley. And that is grinded down in the same way. So you have the grist is already pre-mixed, and then we're off to the mash tun. As the distillery is a new distillery and it was built kind of from the ground up, the engineers could really look at the different production steps and really look at quality and efficiency, and really take all the inputs, even a little bit from the beer industry. As here at Tullamore, they actually have 2 different steps for the mashing. They have the mashing and the lautering in 2 different steps. So the mashing is really, it's mashing in. You take the water in there and they heat it up. And they heat it up in a very special profile, so they can dilute the maximum amount of sugars. There are different sugars within your grist, and they want to dilute it all out. So different sugars dilute best at different temperatures. So they have various stages of temperatures where they dilute the sugars out. And after that, after 3 hours, they pump it off into the lauter tun, where it is then sprinkled on with water another 2 times, and these waters are then used for the fermentation. And the 3rd time is actually used, also sprinkled on and diluted out, but it already has so little sugar content that it wouldn't be efficient to use in the fermentation. So they store it in a separate tank, and they can use that water for the next mashing in. So they have that sugar is not lost, but actually gets increased in sugar content with the next batch. So very efficient here. Obviously, you have 2 different kind of mash bills, one for the single malt, one for the single pot still,
and they are being treated a little bit differently. And they have increased the maximum efficiency for each individual mash bill, so you have to look what you're producing and what you have to set your temperatures to. Next stage is the fermentation. The distillery has 12 washbacks, fermenters, with a capacity of 36,000 liters. You don't have to fill them to the very top. I think they fill them a little bit less. And the fermentation, also brand new, very efficient and very well thought of. They don't have to fill the fermenters with such a low temperature. They can have it a bit higher because they have temperature controls within these washbacks. They have water cooling jackets where you can cool down the fermentation during the fermentation. So they can have kind of a warmer mash going in, and the mash is then added yeast to, and that even heats up more. And while it heats up, they can cool this and keep it at a steady temperature, and the temperature that is best suited for the yeast. And then you can produce the exact at the exact temperature you want, the exact flavors you want. So the Tullamore Distillery is looking at a nice, fruity, green, grassy spirit. What is also interesting is, yes, the two mash bills are different. The 100% malted barley, the single malt, is a bit more high in sugar, so it has a bit more alcohol after the fermentation. And the 50% non-malted and 50% malted barley for the single pot still whiskey is a bit less, but still very good with around 10%. And after 3 days of fermentation, 72 hours, we are off with a nice fruity, green, grassy wort that goes into the distillation. So we're now at the heart piece of the distillery. Yes, these are the 6 stills of Tullamore, and we have the distilling process cut into 2 sides. 3 stills for the pot still whiskey here on the right side, and 3 stills on the left side are for the single malt. Obviously, all of them are being distilled on pot stills. Single malt also implies that it is distilled on pot stills. So let's start off with the single pot still whiskey. That was the one with the unmalted and malted barley. We start off with the wash still here on the right. That looks a bit unusual. They kept the old style of the still to the exact dimensions. You can still see the old stills at another distillery, but they rebuilt it to the same specification. And as you can see it's a bit odd. The neck is actually, or the tower is actually a bit off center, and they actually did that back in the days on purpose, because the single pot still whiskey is a bit different to single malt, and they want to have it a bit smoother, a bit better. So they actually made it off center, so you have more reflux. So it can't rise as fast and just go into the condenser, but it has more tumbling and reflux motions. So you get more copper contact, and that means more flavors, more refined spirit, and just, in general, a nicer whiskey to enjoy. Second still is then 12,000 liters and has a reflux bowl, obviously, again, also for more copper contact, more of the good flavors coming. And the third still is then the third distillation, is also 12,000 liters. Everything handled here is with the 3-sided spirit safe. Obviously, you can see 3 is the number for Tullamore D.E.W. And the measurements are done by a computer, but the actual cuts where they change from the hearts to the feints or the foreshots are actually still done by hand. Even though it's a very, very modern distillery, they could have done it with computer controlled, robot controlled, but they wanted to have the levers on, so the people also move a little bit, and you can have more, the distillers coming to the actual stills. The second side of the distillery is the single malt, and they have a bit of a different shape, just to be customized for the malt that is being produced a little bit differently. Also triple distilled for all the flavors, for all the copper contact. If you have triple distillation, you just have another step where the alcohol vapors and all the flavors inside the spirit get in contact with the copper, and that is improvement for the spirit that comes out. The third spirit, yes, everything has to be 3 here, is the single grain. And it starts off with the ingredients, and we have 95% unmalted wheat. So the base ingredient for the single grain is wheat. Then we add 5% malted barley that comes from the other part of the distillery, just to add in to be a bit more within the natural enzymes. It works better in the process if you have natural products. And that is then fed into a mashing process that is actually continuous. And yeah, that's very complicated. We're not getting into that because we're not chemical engineers. We're interested in the whiskey. So after the mashing, it goes outside into these big stainless steel fermenters. We have 9 of them are in process. They have 12 in total. And yeah, they ferment the mash into a nice wash that is being used in the distillation. And they also do have cooling jackets. They mostly only have to use them in summer, and probably they only have to use them when the sun is shining directly onto the few that are in contact. But they can control the temperature very good, so they have the quality that they're looking for at the Tullamore Distillery. After it's been fermented through, it goes into these 3 big columns, and these are the column stills. Each of the big columns has 50 plates in them, 50 layers, and these separate the alcohol. So steam comes from the bottom and the wash comes from the top, and that is boiling it, and it's a continuous process of distillation. You look at it from the outside, it looks like stainless steel, but there's a lot of copper inside there. All the plates in there are copper, so you have the copper contact, you have the catalytic reactions that is necessary to make a really good Irish whiskey. It goes through these 3 columns, and the temperatures separate the different alcohols and different substances, and at different stages there are different alcohols forming or collecting there, and then you can collect these alcohols out there with different tubes, and there you can actually pick and choose which flavors are in which state of plates, and then you can actually take what you want from the flavors. There are some unwanted flavors that they take out, they're being processed and taken actually for other products than in the whiskey industry, but they're unimportant. They take out what they want, and what they want is a sweet and floral single grain spirit that comes out sweet and floral and is ready then for the maturation, where you can add another layer of flavors to that. Yeah, and let's now head out to the warehouse. My favorite part of a distillery tour, the warehouse. I love that smell. And they've actually done something really cool here in the warehouse. They've built a little tully, as it says here on the back. And this is actually part of the tour. So if you come to the Tullamore Distillery, you will sit here and you will try a whiskey straight from the cask. That is really, really nice. Yeah, let me tell you about the warehouses here at Tullamore. 346,000 barrels casks on site in now 9 warehouses. The 10th is just being built, and there are many more barrels and casks are being filled because they're producing really, really a lot. So let me tell you about where the whiskey is being filled into, or what it is being filled into. First one, a bit of a smaller stave, that is a bourbon barrel. You can see, this is a highly charred cask, so a little bit of a alligator skin here going on, and that's the most barrel that you have here in the warehouses. But at Tullamore, they have 2 different classifications of the bourbon barrels. First one, they get it fresh from America. You have a lot of vanilla, a lot of caramel still in there from the bourbon, and that's then classified as a bourbon barrel. And if you refill it, they call it
sometimes called a refill, sometimes they call it an Irish cask because there's been Irish whiskey in there before. So this is the two classifications of bourbon barrels, firstly used and second one non-used. And the next one is the sherry cask, a bit bigger, and the sherry cask or sherry butts, usually 500 liters, and they are stacked not as high because they are so big. They have had sherry in there before. A lot of interesting flavors just added to the mix, very, very interesting. So we've learned that we have 3 different types of spirit, and they are put into 3 different type of casks. First fill, second fill bourbon, and sherry cask, except for the grain. The grain is not put into the sherry cask because just the flavors that come from the sherry cask would overwhelm the grain. So they just don't do that here at Tullamore. So you have 9 minus 1 types of spirit that is matured in different casks. So this is the recipe book for the master blender, where you can pick and choose what type of spirit you want to mix, and the different recipes of the standard bottlings from the distillery, the core range. They have different recipes, and they're being picked from the warehouse and curated for the really good flavor that we have. But this is not all. Then we have some other casks. This here, for example, very red burgundy colored. This is a barrique cask, a wine cask. So these are kind of experimental casks where you have special bottlings that are not such a high number. They have rum casks, wine casks, a lot of wine casks, and different types of casks that are a bit more experimental. So the Tullamore Distillery want to move into the future, maybe into some other stuff, and they want to find out how that works. And yeah, I find that really, really fascinating. What is also really nice is they are one of the few distilleries that still have cooperage on site. So here you see a bit of the old tools of the cooperage. So that gives the Tullamore Distillery much more freedom in purchasing casks around the world, because they don't have to look at if this cask is actually airtight. They can just fill it, but they just want that cask really badly. They just get it here and they can repair it on site, and just it's really good for their procurement of casks, and they can do much more in terms of cask variation. Yeah, so after it's been barreled, it's been aged, and it comes after in the bottle, and let's find out how all these nice spirits actually taste in the glass. So this was it with the production, and now we are following with a little bit of a interview and a little bit of tasting with the whiskeys. So I'm sitting here with Kevin Piggott. You've been with 10 years with Tullamore now, and you're the global brand ambassador, so 1 foot in the community, 1 foot in the distillery.
Yep.
And thank you very much for having us here at the distillery.
No, it's great to have you here.
Yeah, and
it's a nice sunny day to come, so.
Yeah, and thank you for showing us around. It was amazing to see all that in action. So very nice. You've been part from the start here as the distillery was still in planning and building everything up. So how is it to have a new distillery? Is it from ground up? Is that old tradition and new efficiency? How is that going with the distillery?
Yeah, so starting with a distillery and coming to a site where there's nothing, just bogland, trees, forests, and then seeing the evolvement of 35 million being invested, and then up and beyond 100 million now in a full grain to glass distillery, doing milling to distilling of 3 styles of whiskey, maturing them all on site, having a cooperage and bottling them. So there's no other distillery in the world, triple distilling 3 styles of whiskey, maturing and bottling them on a single site. And I think we're very proud of that. We went from a team of 12 to over 100 staff, and the team continues to grow. We hope to have 15 to 20 more staff in the coming years, with a series of further extensions to the site as we continue to grow. So it's a big site, 57 acres. We're built on a bog in the middle of Ireland, very small town. Tullamore is only 14,000 people, and we're just on the edge of the town. So for a small town, there's a lot of excitement to have such a big whiskey distillery and building, as you know. That sort of, when your friends come to town, they want to show their cousins. Your out of town people, like, this is on your doorstep. Every small town in Ireland wishes it had a massive distillery to show off to friends, and we're in a room with whiskies dating back to the 1980s. We've got hundreds of really interesting whiskey samples, and it's great to have distilling back home in Tullamore.
Yeah, I was amazed of how everything was set up. So it was very innovative. Still, the shape of the still is very traditional. I like it. So, really nice.
The best of both worlds. We have the pagodas on top of the building, which is a hint to old. It has no functionality. It's more just a nod, an architectural nod to the past and respecting that. But so much of a new distillery is about modern efficiencies, using modern technology, like a new Samsung phone, the newest microprocessor, the newest camera, the newest battery technology. We want to use all of this in the room we're in. You know, on the table in front of us, we have little etchings of old copper from old stills etched in as mementos of the past. But then we have screens that connect us to other labs and other sister distilleries that we have, that we can share knowledge on, you know, new sampling methods for draft, new analytical tools for distilled spirit, new micro distilling techniques for innovation. So there's a lot of cross learnings, and because we're 193 years as an Irish whiskey, we have a huge amount of experience making whiskey. So the constant refinement each year and perfection of this sort of liquid, our Tullamore D.E.W, our guest from Germany always call it actually the legendary. That's what Tony taught me, the guy we met earlier. He always said the Germans would say the legendary one because they read this, but very few people would define it as this. Some people say green label or the original, but they always say, oh, I want the legendary one. Or if you ask which one do you have in your local store, the legendary one for some reason is the words.
It actually says the legendary on there.
Yeah.
I didn't know that either. It's just blended in there, just very nicely. So we're having the Tullamore D.E.W, the legendary.
the original triple blend, yeah. So this was the first Irish whiskey to incorporate all three styles of Irish whiskey. So on the nose, you get that green apple coming from the malt. There's some single malt in our blend. There's pepper spice from the pot still, giving that little bit of texture. And the last element is this underlying vanilla sweetness, this floral character coming from the grain. All three combined to make a whiskey that's very hard to make, but really easy to drink, really delicate, soft. So with that, we should have a little taste.
Yep. Cheers.
Sludge. So for me, although it's quite easy to drink, it's not very punchy or intense. It's still carrying this warmth in my mouth, this lovely, gentle texture. The old whiskey bottles of Tullamore D.E.W we saw downstairs from the 50s, they had these words like mild, mellow. It was always a softer style of whiskey for someone who just wanted something easy to drink. And it's the perfect whiskey for people who kind of want something that isn't a heavy style of whiskey. It's, if Lafroig is on one end, heavy, earthy, peaty, this is the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah, it's I would say a nice beginner-friendly whiskey.
Absolutely.
It's just, but it's soft. It's a little bit sweet. But it still has some good amount of fruitiness to it. So I would even say pretty much a fresh fruitiness from my point of view. But yes, you can feel the different styles that you mentioned from the different
Components,
distillates. Yeah.
And I think when you're talking about fruit, we have to remember every single Tullamore D.E.W uses Oloroso sherry casks as well. So we're bringing in some of those perhaps dried fruits that come from our European oak, a little bit of tannin profile, a little bit of that cloying effect, the clinging, or however you might describe it on your gums. So yeah, I think this whiskey, it's sometimes forgotten how good it actually is.
I would say the most distinctive is how round and easy it is. It's, yes, I know that you don't like it, that the old style is light, and light is nowadays associated differently, but I would say definitely smooth and gentle.
Yeah, smooth and silky, smooth and gentle, definitely.
I like
and
it.
You're right, the malt is definitely designed to round out some of the more, pot still can give a little bit of spice, but sometimes intensity, so you have to balance it very carefully, and that's why the master blender has to work so hard to find equilibrium with those three styles.
Yeah, but I love the what I was amazed of was how much copper contact and how much is really into the distilling. If you're in the still room and you see what you do triple distillation, you have these shapes, they're quite thin and tall as well, good separation of alcohol, that then you realize, okay, that's just a precisely distilled whiskey. So, but I've seen in the warehouse, you've told me also there are some special casks that don't fill into the 3 standard casks. Are you going to do something cool in the future? Is the brand going forward somehow?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, in the distillery, on every single distillery tour, you taste whiskey straight from a cask that isn't bottled, and maybe we will bottle that in the future. We will listen to people and listen to what they say about those liquids. Maybe we'll use that as an opportunity to trial innovation liquids and let people tell us, do they love it or not? We obviously did a whiskey finished in rum, and people loved it. Whiskey and rum, as we know, we learned from like brands like Balvenie. They did a Caribbean rum cask and it was stunning. And how whiskey and rum just combines wonderfully. You know, whiskey and tequila less so. So it's understanding which spirits work really well in unison. And this one has a very soft influence of rum. So it's not to taste like a rum. It's still to taste like Tullamore D.E.W, but a hint of the rum world, that molasses spice, that banoffee, which is like banana and toffee combined in this sort of dessert that you find in Ireland. Maybe even tropical fruit.
Okay, very cool, very cool. So the next one is the Caribbean rum cask.
Caribbean rum cask, yeah. Sometimes we call it the XO. So on the bottle, a lot of people don't necessarily see it, but it's a X and an O.
Okay.
A lot of times it's hard to read. This is actually the newer label. The old label was a little harder to read some of that. And it refers to the rum. The rum is extra old. It's rum aged in barrels. It's not a silver rum. I imagine certain rums would not contribute a lot to the barrel. So the rum sits in the cask for 3 months, and it's 60% rum. It's full of coffee, caramel, treacle. It's really intense, and it leaves this really thick residue all over the cask. And then our whiskey goes in for 3 months, and you have this very different note on it. So I think of rum raisin ice cream. If you've ever had this, it's something like that.
Yeah, I would have expected a much lighter taste to it. So this is like a really hefty rum. So yeah, rum is not rum there.
Yeah, and one thing what we're doing, I guess, we're increasing the alcohol. We're bringing this at 43%. So the ester profile is slightly different. We had a few bartenders here yesterday, and they use it in their old fashions in the bar because it's a little stronger, a little sweeter. They can use less sugar making the old fashioned because this is naturally sweeter, and the higher alcohol in an old fashioned makes it stand out a little bit more because you're mixing it and diluting it with ice, water, and perhaps a splash of soda or even just your Angostura bitters. So suddenly it works in some mixed drinks really well. I think a lot of people want things that taste a little bit different, and I think this is a really interesting one because thousands of Irish went to the Caribbean. They were sent as slaves, unfortunately, during the Cromwell time, but they in fascinating ways actually helped build some rum distilleries because the Irish had distillation techniques before they were ever making rum in the Caribbean. So they were just using something different, molasses. So the XO is a bit of a tribute to that, but super interesting liquid. As I said, slightly higher alcohol, a little sweeter in its overall taste profile. And
yeah, as you said, there are more raisins. Yeah, it feels like it.
Yeah, raisins. Just more warmth on the palate coming from the higher alcohol. That little bit of spice, maybe.
Comes on fresh, and then with a lot of sweetness, a little bit of spiciness coming up, and more of the aftertaste.
Yeah.
It's a bit heavier than the normal one.
A little bit,
the
yeah.
legendary.
It's definitely for people who it's their first whiskey. I would never give them this. It's definitely for someone who has a little bit of a more acquired palate, who's into their whiskey and knows a little bit.
Yeah, it would be a bit tough for a beginner.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's off limits because you still feel, still triple distilled, still a lot of copper contact. It's not it's not like a really hardcore spicy whiskey,
Yeah,
but
true.
it has more of an edge to it.
Correct. That's a very good description of it.
What I found fascinating about Tullamore used to be like a distillery just out here in the countryside, and then discontinued. It used to be just then a brand without like a distillery. It was built in, I think, a license, and now it's a new distillery. So you got a bit of that journey, because you started off when it was just a brand. So how does that feel? How did you feel the transition?
Yeah, I mean, there's a legacy with this brand that we need to respect. It's such an old brand. It's the second largest Irish whiskey in the world, the largest Irish whiskey in Germany, which is an incredible statistic for a small family-owned company to have this, I guess, influence in whiskey circles. The Tullamore Dew specifically, and its heritage is very interesting, because the original distillery closed in 1954, and the distillery, they ran out of whiskey in 1959. And Tullamore was made in different places, but finally we got to come back home in 2014 and build a new legacy here. So we're very excited, and some of the liquids that are in the innovation pipelines are going to hopefully excite people as we have more control over every stage of the process. If we want to innovate with new sherry styles in terms of cask beyond Oloroso, if we want to use different yeast strains, if we want to try different distillation techniques, we have more innovation capability in our mash bills. So now having our own distillery as a playground allows so much broader innovation. Even if we are not sure what we're going to do with it, we can lay it down and play the waiting game, and let's see in a few years how...
Maybe it gets better.
Exactly, but how different components over time can change. How whiskies evolve. What might be popular today might not be popular in 10 years. Rum casks were not super popular 15 years ago in whiskey, in cask finishing, but in the next 10, 15 years will something that we have taken a bet on to see if it's popular, it may be. So there's a bit of strategic guessing.
So back in the days, it was just you had a recipe and you said, give me that distillate and I'll buy casks from here, and so it's a bit hard to, so you can't really be in the distillery, can you? Or you work with them probably sometimes closely, but
you work with them and their technical teams with a spec that you've given them and a regimen. But as I said, having your own distillery, we're very lucky. There's 40 distilleries in Ireland, okay? We're the largest single brand distillery, as I said. We only make Tullamore Dew here, so we don't make lots of other whiskies. Some distilleries make a huge conglomerate of different whiskies. We just focus on Tullamore Dew, so our focus is on our liquid excellence at every touch point. You saw that today as you went through in the bottling hall. You're not seeing other bottles. We're not bottling anything else. In the future, we may decide for small brands to do it, but as it stands, that's not in our plans. We want to increase our production and keep up with our growth and make sure we can look after our own needs first. Because there's no point bottling for other people if then we are running into production challenges for our own. So we need to keep on top of things as we continue to grow very quickly.
So now we're going into the 12-year-old.
Absolutely.
So this is not from the distillery yet, huh?
This is stunning liquid, but this is our first age statement, yeah? And I think it's really good because in Irish whiskey there's lots of brands now that are non-age statements. So this is a lovely sense of age that you're going, okay, this has a lot of structure to it because the wood is giving that backbone to the whiskey. This is much more grown up, more refined. I think you get this creme brulee sweetness. We actually call this like our chocolate whiskey. There's always this luscious taste to it. In my whiskey pairings, in master classes, we pair it with Frère Rocher. And people like this sort of rich, silky texture of a luscious chocolate, and then there's even that hint of nuttiness or those attributes that come through sometimes in your sherry cask. So in our blends, because we're a triple blend, we have all these permutations and combinations we can create. And the 12-year-old has a higher percentage of pot still. And the pot still spends a lot more time in the sherry cask. So there's a lot more tannins, European oak, sherry influence on this whiskey. I love it.
Yeah, I want to say, it feels a little bit more like a sherry whiskey. So the percentage-wise from the 8 types of standard casks you have, I would say, feels like more of an Oloroso in there.
Yeah, we're going up probably 20% more sherry cask introduction to this, so it's quite substantial. We're not talking marginally.
And it feels just a bit more mature. It's strange because usually when you have a whiskey, then you have at the beginning it's a bit harsh, and then with more maturity you get into that roundness. And with the legendary, you start off very round, and it's still very round with a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
But in more of a mature roundness.
Okay, nice. And I think the 12-year-old for us, it's very special. It's something that we're very proud of. It's one of our most awarded liquids. In Ireland, we have the Irish Whiskey Awards, which are pretty prestigious, and it won for many years the best whiskey under €60. And it was this sort of pound for pound. If you wanted a nicer whiskey without going into super crazy price territory, it was a really good whiskey. So it's very much a gift for someone. It's for special occasions.
You can still afford it, and
Absolutely.
it's really good.
For a 12-year-old whiskey, there's other Irish whiskies that are their 12-year-olds are maybe 10, 12 euros more expensive. So it's good quality. You're getting the triple distilled, you're getting the triple cask matured, you're getting more pot still and sherry, you're getting your age statement, and it's an award-winning liquid. It wins over a lot of bourbon drinkers for me that maybe have never had much Irish, so they don't know if Irish whiskey's that good. And when they taste this, they love the sort of enhanced oakiness, and maybe those more rich flavors that come through. So when we taste it, the lingering finish being a bit more prominent. So let's launch it.
Launch it.
Yeah, this one is. This one actually is really interesting. I would say if I taste people over the last 10 years, 95% people will love this. When I go to the malts, they're more divisive. People either love or hate them, but this one is an absolute crowd pleaser. I always feel very confident at whiskey shows. If someone's like, I don't know if I like Irish, I'm already in my back pocket grabbing this bottle because I know it's going to change their mind.
I think you mentioned silky. Yeah, it has much more red fruit and silky, smooth. That's the beauty of it. Bit about that European oak touch to it. Not much. It's not like overwhelming, but it has that little bit of bitter sweetness, just a smidge of it to make it a little bit more exciting. I like it.
Yeah, and we have, I don't know if you know it, this is a bit geeky, but in the lab we're always looking at ways to identify flavours at really low thresholds. So we have a series of different techniques that help. And there's an Irishman who teaches people around the world how to breathe better and more deeply. So he works with musicians like Chris Martin from Coldplay. So he does a technique whereby if you actually hold your nose, so you breathe in, you breathe out, you hold your nose, and you rock your head back and forth 5 or 6 times. So before I'm on a world whiskey judging panel or any of this, I do this a few times, and it clears your nostrils, and it actually allows you to breathe a little bit clearer, and you find that you're able to pick up. Some days we're much sharper, always early in the day, really good for nosing whiskey, but I find if I do that a few times before I go at my whiskey, I can really pick subtle notes that other days I struggle to find. So just to demonstrate, breathe in, breathe out. And if you do this 3 or 4 times, okay, just a gentle tilt. You wait until you need to breathe just slightly. You don't overhold it. And you actually just release some of the sort of tension, and it allows you just from a sensory. And you'll actually find out if you do it 3 or 4 times, interesting for guys to try this at home. When you have a little bit of time and no one's watching you, don't do this in a bar. They might laugh at you and think that you are drinking too much whiskey. But it's one of my tricks that really helps. You know, I was saying we have these German tools that we bought for our lab here.
I love it.
And a lot of guests, they really get nervous when we see the sensory aromas. They don't know some of the language, the vernacular, the vocabulary to describe a whiskey, but also they struggle to get underneath the skin of a whiskey. So this blows up just the aromas that lie within it without the intensity of the alcohol. And it
Mine is just really strong vanilla.
Exactly, and I think people before go, I didn't get the vanilla. Chocolate in a whiskey. What do you mean fruit? What type of fruit? Stone fruit, stewed fruit,
This really reminds me of, I've been to La Réunion when I was at a vanilla factory, and that is
Yeah.
That's really strong vanilla.
Yeah, and whiskey is such a sensory experience, so it's important when guests interact with a whiskey. It's about the smell as much as the taste. When we go to the next whiskey, I try and delay tasting it as long as I can because I love how it's like a perfume. So that's the beauty of whiskey. It's so sensorial, and that's we had a guest yesterday, and they were talking about the memories attached to all the flavors that they, you know, when you have this memory of vanilla from a factory, we have this really deep connection with flavor, where they came from, what our reaction is to it. And vanilla was the very first flavor you were ever given in your life, you know? So there's a reason in a very complex human being way that we have this affinity with particularly vanillin, derived from when we break down this lignin in these American oak barrels.
Yeah, always. If people always ask us on our video, how do you get into real deep tasting? And the thing is, if you think about taste, you just have to get hold of taste. You take some vanilla. You have some standing over there, and you just smell it. You just take the ones that you pick up from other people that they smell, and you smell them in pure and kind of get to remember it. And I love that so many distilleries have that they can have the pure taste. What is it? Can you find it in a whiskey? And I really love that.
And we have downstairs, we have ultrasonic atomizers that spray. We used to try it earlier, the distilled water with the whiskey. And this actually sprays out just the aroma, so you can get a sense of the single grain, the single malt, the single pot still, and decide which you like, and therefore create your own bespoke triple blend if you think you can make one better than us. So we'll see. We'll give you after this. We will go down and you can make one.
Let's do that.
And we'll see if your blend is better than ours. You can talk to our agent, and we can agree a deal for Whiskey D.E.W.
Oh yeah, that would be really nice. That would be really nice. So you've set up this huge distillery, and we're producing so much whiskey. Are you actually now taking in other distilleries, bottling, doing their stuff for them, actually under license or under recipes?
As it stands now, we solely make Tullamore D.E.W here. So we are the largest single brand distillery in Ireland. That is all we make. That may change in the future. I don't know. We haven't made a business decision to do that yet. But for the moment, all we focus on is Tullamore D.E.W. And as I said earlier, we're a single grain to glass site. So one thing that's really important about what we do is we distill the whiskey in this very building. We move it 20 meters to a filling store where you met Tony, and he's filling the barrels, putting it in a warehouse that's 50 meters away, and then putting it in a bottling hall years later that's 100 meters away. So we're not using diesel trucks up and down the country. We're being very sustainable in terms of our heat technology that we use for recapturing latent heat in our distillation, our heat exchangers, our planting of trees outside to rebalance our carbon footprint, to take more carbon into the ground, to help biodiversity with our bug hostels, to have a series of different, this whole building that we're in is heated by the stills.
Oh yeah, I love that.
And next year the whole bottling hall will be heated by this building too. So we're constantly reusing every single thing on site to make sure nothing gets wasted. You know, earlier the grain, obviously every distillery is doing this. We're using the residual grain to feed for animal feed. So it's a beautiful cyclical process. There's a reason it has continued throughout the ages, because it gives back a lot that it takes. That's probably one of the reasons I love it.
Yeah, the efficiency helps everyone. It conserves energy, it's environmental friendly, it conserves costs, make the product not as expensive.
Super important,
and everyone's more happy with that. And so the last one is the 14-year-old now. Oh, okay.
This
one in the middle here.
Yes, this is probably the most difficult one to make, in the sense that, I'll take that back. I won't say it's the most difficult, I'd say it's the most expensive to make, because we're finishing it in a series of different casks. So it matures in a bourbon cask typically for 13 and a half years, and for the last 6 months we put some into sherry, some into Madeira, and some into port. So sherry butts, port pipes, and Madeira drums, and a small amount still stays in the bourbon barrels. So this is a fruit bomb. Okay, for people who like single malts, who like Speyside rich single malts, but without the earthiness, a bit more clean, triple distilled, so a little more refined. For me, it's baked apple, it's pear drops.
Yeah, I want to say
Apricot,
that
maybe?
it's a fruit bomb, definitely, and it's it has various types in it, but for me it's a little bit, also a little bit pear, but not the typical pear that you get from the new make, but one of these more ripe pears.
Okay.
Very, very ripe pears, and baked apple maybe. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, no, the pear, the apple, it's definitely, and that's your single malt is your base. That distilled spirit has lots of citrusy tones, and then you've got this sort of, it's sitting in the front seat of the car beside the fruit is this beautiful wood interlaced with it. So all of those oaks, you think some of that fortified wine, they're in European oak as well as the American. So you have a rich combination of tannins, of different types of fruit all combining. I joke it's like eating all the Skittles in one, if you've ever done that. If you haven't, you should try it. But and one of our rules with Tullamore is we usually drink with a toast. So may the roof above never fall in and the friends below never fall out. So skull.
Skull.
Much more juicy. Like biting into a red apple nearly, huh?
I like it how much fresh fruity you get from it. So definitely the malt part in that you have in the whiskey, I do love it. And now that I've swallowed it, here comes a little bit of that spicy touch to it. Yeah.
So it's 41.3%. I call it hipster proof, unnecessarily specific. People often ask why we pick this. Is when we're presented liquids by the master blender, he often presents them in 3 to 6 different alcohol strengths and tells us to ask him. He will have a suggestion, but he will also ask us which we think is the most interesting at different ABVs. And sometimes too strong actually takes away from it. You get the intensity of the alcohol that overshadows the subtleties. I know in the whiskey community we sometimes love older, stronger cask strength whiskies, but for me actually there's a huge amount of flavour to be found and appreciated at lower alcohol thresholds. So it's it's controversial, it's maybe counter to some people's opinions, but it will be my own.
The problem I see with Tullamore is pretty dangerous. If you have a good conversation, you have a Tullamore on the side, then why is my glass already empty? That's
Magic.
A bit dangerous, because they are rare, really well distilled and just easy to drink. That's a bit of a danger here, but I love the fruitiness, and I love the gentleness. I love the balance that you have in there, but a balance between nice flavors, I would say.
Yeah, and actually we met Engrand, our head cooper, earlier, and he was working on some of these barrels and just making sure that the wood staves are perfect, that we're not losing any of this spirit, that we have the wood quality procedures to make sure that this is a stunning liquid. It's corked, it's hand bottled on our line 3, so a lot of quality touch points go into this, because it's an expensive whiskey to buy and we want to make sure it's really stunning for anyone who gets to taste it. And also it's a bit of a moment to go, hey, Irish whiskey has a range of incredible whiskies. As I said, 40 whiskey distilleries, 450 brands. It's a big category now. So we really cannot stand still. We need to continue to innovate, to produce really high quality whiskies, because we're an established whiskey and we don't release every innovation. There's so many that we do not. So the ones that make it tell you something. They are really, truly outstanding liquids that progressed for a reason, because we felt we don't want to release anything that we don't think will sell well, because that would insult our future innovations. It would affect our legacy, our brand sort of credibility. So we need to make sure that these are stunning liquids. And actually the 14, for people who wouldn't normally drink Irish whiskey, this is one that wins. There's a whiskey bar in London and he refused to carry Irish whiskey. He had 400 whiskies and the only Irish whiskey he has on his shelf is this. I won't mention the bar to be mean to him, but he tasted it and he was like, that's actually really good, I'll have one. But I was still annoyed because I was saying, you are you need to open up and explore. You know, there's so many incredible whiskies in this island that are deserving of trying.
Yeah, I think now that I had my third sip of it, it's becoming a bit stronger. So the strength, as in the spiciness and the volume that kicks in when you have a little bit more sips. Whereas the others, they were more lighter. You could have them gentle. You have the freshness and the sweetness of the rum that just added up. Here, this you can feel a bit of the oak. You can feel a bit the spiciness. I like it.
This is definitely, I would say, the most intense from a flavor standpoint. I think you've said it brilliantly, and it's definitely for someone who's really acquainted with whiskey, maybe used to more intense flavor profiles, and therefore will not be intimidated by it. And
if I would get it from a experienced Scotch one, I would give that one first.
Gotcha.
If you have a newbie, I would go for
maybe
even, I'm not quite sure. I like this one as the sweetness was. Maybe that could be for the beginners as well. But
it's definitely a direction of your beginning points, but just a staple. You know, for us, from our research, even in Germany, this is people's like Friday night whiskey. This is their after work every Friday. It doesn't mean that they don't drink other whiskies, but it's just this lovely, good, consistent blend that they know is good value. It's not going to break the bank, and they can really enjoy it. And then there's other occasions for some of the other whiskies.
Yeah, I love it. And it was amazing experience at the whole distillery and everything. So thank you very much for showing us around. Thank you very much for telling us everything.
Thank you, Sean. Yeah, so happy to have you here visiting. As I said, our new distillery experience just opened up on St. Patrick's Day of this year. So we're still teaching people about it, getting people who come here to try some of our whiskies and to experience the distillery. So thank you for making the effort coming to see our bottling, our cooperage, and our blending lab.
Yeah. So thank you very much for watching the video. If you ever come to Ireland, it's just a 1 hour drive from Dublin here. It's just right in the middle between Dublin and Galway, so it's a nice stop to see and visit. You can see a lot of stuff. I haven't even gotten everything here on camera, so if you ever come to Ireland, this is a must stop. So thank you very much for watching this video, and see you next time.